Lord, show us the Father and we will be satisfied. For 3 years, Philip has been with the other disciples, following Jesus around, seeing all that Jesus has done, hearing all that Jesus has said. And now on this last night of his life, Jesus is gathered there with his disciples. And Philip is getting a little impatient, saying, okay, Jesus, just show us the Father and we'll be satisfied. Like he's been waiting 3 years to see this. Jesus is clearly disappointed. Have you been with me all this time, Peter and Philip? It was Philip's turn to be Peter for this story. Have you been with me all this time, Philip? And still you do not understand? Whoever has seen me has seen the Father. And if you don't believe me when I say that, believe my words that it's true. And if you don't believe my words, then believe the works that you have seen me do for these last years. Poor Philip. Poor clueless Philip. If you're at the banquet the other night, you heard Bishop Mike note that I've driven 240,000 miles, give or take, in this job. And I know some stretches of road better than others. I have a favorite sign. It's on I-80. It's between mile markers 291 and 292. And it's before you go up an overpass, and you see it eastbound and westbound both. And the sign simply says, watch for wind on overpass. Have you ever watched for wind? It's air, people. You can't see it. But of course, what you can see is trees bending and objects flying through the air and semis wobbling on the overpass. You can see what the wind is doing. You just can't see the wind. But you know how powerful it is as it goes over. It's sort of as though Philip is this driver along I-80 and sees things flying across the road and semis tipped over and trees bent halfway to the ground and saying, well, Jesus, show us the wind. Philip has seen what Jesus has done. And Jesus goes on to say, let me tell you, the things that I've done, you'll do, and you'll do even greater things than I do, because I'll be gone. It's because I'll be gone that there'll be greater things than I've done, because the Father will send the Spirit to you. The Spirit who will empower you to do all the things that I have done, and even greater things. And so it is. For Jesus fed his 5,000. We, his body, feed the tens of thousands. Jesus healed one at a time. We, through our ministries, heal tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands at a time. Jesus proclaimed to crowds of thousands. The gospel is proclaimed to crowds of millions. Christ's body does do, by the power of the Spirit, the things that he did and still greater things. This is the gift of the power of the Holy Spirit that came down at Pentecost, that we'll celebrate tomorrow. God's great gift. On Ascension, Jesus said, you all disciples, stay put until I give you what God's promised you from on high, the gift of power of the Holy Spirit. And so it is that 120 people are gathered in a building, sounds like a Lutheran church on Sunday morning. And they hear the wind, and they see the flames, and they are all blown out into the street. And they all begin to speak of God's great deeds of power. They all begin to talk about their faith. Think if that happened on a Sunday morning at one of our Lutheran churches. If all 120 or so gathered there got moved out into the street and then started talking about their faith, people in our town would think we were drunk too. It would be a minor miracle, because that's not who we are. And yet, it's exactly who we're called and gifted to be. Those who blow out into the world, speaking as Peter did of the power of the Spirit to welcome all who call on the name of the Lord will be saved. No exceptions. It takes the power of the Spirit for us to dare to speak that kind of welcome, that kind of openness. But how dare we not? As both Bishop Candia and Bishop Reinhardt have challenged us. And the truth is, it's not only unfaithful not to do those things, not to take the basket off our light, it's kind of dumb. I learned that as a child. I didn't realize it until years later, but I learned it as a child. When I was young, my brother and I would occasionally get to stay with my grandparents while Mom was at work. My brother Rick and I, Rick, you're here. Rick, wave your hand. See? Yeah. People rarely confuse us. He's the good-looking one. Rick and I were staying with Grandma on a hot summer day. And Grandma could have been sent over by central casting. She was soft, kind of round, and she had a laugh that sounded like bells. And she baked and she cooked, and she doted on her grandchildren. I mean, how could you not? And she spoiled us a bit all the time. That afternoon, she took us along with her to the grocery store. And she indulged us, she bought each of us a squirt gun. And we got back to the house and we couldn't wait for the car to even stop. We had the back doors open. We flew out the doors. Of course, we left the groceries there for Grandma. We went and filled up our squirt guns at the hydrant. And then we began playing with each other and squirting each other and goofing around like boys do. And then we noticed something. This large, slow-moving target that was Grandma with the groceries. And we swarmed her with our squirt guns and squirted her from every side. And she shrieked and giggled as only Grandma could and said things to us and made her way to the house. And she got inside the house and we quickly lost interest and we went back to squirting each other and playing around and goofing around until all of a sudden, out of a cloudless sky, a downpour. Grandma coming around the corner of the house with a garden hose. And I learned two things that day. Number one, don't mess with Grandma. Number two, if you want to get somebody wet, don't mess around with a squirt gun. Get yourself a hose and attach it to an endless source of water. This, I believe, is the gift of Pentecost for us who understand grace. Somehow we've gotten this notion that God dispenses grace to us a few ounces at a time. We only get enough for each day, and all we can do is squirt a little bit here and a little bit there, lest we get anybody too wet. When in fact, our baptism roots us in the very water of life. I know it's a mixed metaphor to be rooted in the water. Bear with me. We are tied, connected to the water of life. We can't run out of grace. We can't run out of faith. We can't run out of testimony. We can't run out of the presence of Christ. How silly that we think we have to. I pray for an experience of Pentecost among the whole of the Nebraska Synod, that we might hear the rush of the mighty wind, that we might see flames coming down from heaven, that it might light our wicks, that we might let our light shine for the sake of others, that we might be bold in speaking of welcome, that we might dare to talk about our faith. Oh, I'm preaching to myself as much as to you. I'm no Mike Reinhardt on an airplane. But all it takes is a few words at a time. And the more you do it, the more it builds up your testimonial muscles, your willingness to witness, your willingness to talk about your faith. You know that Ukraine and Russia are coming up this week in a conversation you'll be having. All it takes is, that's an awful thing that's happening there. You know, I learned this week that my church has been there since the day after the war started, taking care of Ukrainian refugees. We have sent millions to help them. All it takes is saying, I am so sorry. I will be praying for you, and mean it. All it takes is saying, I hear what you're saying, but my faith just won't let me go there. We don't need to stand on street corners with bullhorns and sandwich boards proclaiming the end is near to be witnessing to our faith. We need only speak to others what we ourselves have found, what I trust you have found, or you would not be here. That the resurrection of Jesus Christ is real and happens in your life and will happen again and again. The promise that no end is truly the end for the people of Christ, but that there is always life yet to come. Yes. If discipleship isn't challenging, if it's not occasionally hard, you're not yet doing it right. But if you're not finding joy, you're doing it wrong. The gift of Pentecost, the gift of the gospel, is living water for a thirsty world, light for a world in shadow, hope for a world desperate for a word that needs it. The ability to disagree agreeably in a world that's increasingly polarized and combative. We can do these things. I have watched you do these things. I can't wait to see how the Spirit blows you back into your congregations and communities. I know what you can do. I have seen you vote. You're quick. You're good. I have heard you sing. I have seen you act together. I have seen you welcome one another. You are the gifts of God for the people of God, the gifts of God for the world. Let that Holy Spirit blow you out of this place and across I-80 or whatever highways it is that lie between here and your home. And as you get home, find ways to remember the Christ who's made you his own, whose water flows in you endlessly, that you might pour that water out, the water of your faith, the water of God's grace, the water of welcome for all who are seeking it. Catch the fire of the Holy Spirit and let your light shine.